In 1971, a few minutes after the takeoff of an American airline, a passenger sitting in the back seat called the air hostess to him and gave her a smiling letter. In that letter, only a few words were written that shook the whole of America. Who was that passenger, and why has the FBI not been able to find him dead or alive? It's a long story, but the most powerful intelligence agency in the United States has not been able to find any trace of that passenger for the past 50 years. Welcome back to the InfoCaps videos. Viewers, this interesting incident began on November 24, 1971, at Portland Airport. A man who appeared to be a businessman booked a Seattle ticket from Portland and started heading straight for the plane. At that time, there was no strictness on domestic flights in America. Neither was the luggage of the passengers checked, nor was their identity verified. This was a Northwest Orient Airlines Boeing 727, which was to reach Seattle from Portland in just 45 minutes. With a briefcase of sunglasses, this passenger named Dan Cooper boarded the plane and sat in his favorite seat, which was the last seat of the plane. He ordered a drink for himself and also lit a cigarette. Everything was going fine until then, because smoking was also allowed in the 70s. At 2:58 p.m., the flight took off. As soon as the takeoff was over, Dan Cooper turned around and placed a smiling envelope on the air hostess sitting next to him. When the air hostess, whose name was Florence Schaffner, read the letter, it was as if the ground under her feet had slipped. "Miss, I have a bomb here, and I would like you to sit by me. I have a bomb, and I want you to sit next to me." When Florence Schaffner sat next to Dan Cooper, she opened her briefcase, which contained 8 dynamite sticks and a detonator. In short, the plane was hijacked, and Dan Cooper had a total of 3 demands. Before 5 o'clock, he needed a $200,000 cash, 2 pairs of parachutes, and a refueling truck ready at Seattle Airport. At the end of his demands, he indirectly told Florence Schaffner that if there was a mistake, I would tear the bomb. Apart from Dan Cooper, there were 35 passengers on board who had no idea about what was going on behind the scenes. Florence Schaffner took Dan Cooper's demands, went into the cockpit, and told the captain the whole story. Another air hostess, whose name was Tina McClough, now took an intercom and sat next to Dan Cooper, who was working to send a message between the pilot and Dan Cooper. Remember that this was the first plane in American history to be hijacked, which was done for ransom. This is why local authorities and the FBI decided to meet all the demands of the hijacker. Obviously, the authorities also knew that Dan Cooper would not be able to run far from them. The flight, which was to land in Seattle in just 45 minutes, was now hovering around the airport for the next 1.5 hours, and the remaining 35 passengers, who were completely unaware of the whole incident, were told that the plane was having trouble landing due to technical difficulties. Meanwhile, $20,000 of $10,000 notes were collected from the Seattle National Bank, whose serial numbers were noted, and 2 pairs of parachutes were also arranged from a nearby skydiving club. The plane was landed at 5:45 p.m., and as promised, Dan Cooper was given a bag full of money and 2 pairs of parachutes. The plane was also refueled. After fulfilling his demands, Dan Cooper gave permission to 35 passengers and 2 flight crews to get off the plane, while the pilots and 2 flight crews were told to stay on board. It was nighttime, and the plane took off again. Dan Cooper sent some special instructions to the pilot through Tina McCloud, who was sitting next to him. He wanted the landing gears and flaps of the plane to remain open, the altitude to be 10,000 feet. the speed to be 320 kilometers per hour, and the plane to be taken straight to Mexico City. The pilot fulfilled all the other demands, but it was not possible to take the plane straight to Mexico City due to fuel. Therefore, the pilot gave Dan Cooper two options for refueling: Reno or Phoenix. Dan Cooper agreed to Reno. On the other hand, local and federal authorities were also doing their job. Two fighter jets were sent behind the plane, but they were not able to maintain such a slow speed, so they started circling around the plane. In the dark of the night, the plane was heading towards Reno. Meanwhile, Dan Cooper told Tina McLeod to go to the cockpit, where two pilots and one flight attendant were present. When Tina turned to close the cockpit door, she only saw for the last time that Dan Cooper was tying something on his waist. After that, the stairs of the plane opened, and Dan Cooper jumped from there. Whatever happened after that has been discussed since the last 50 years. After 3 hours, when the plane landed in Reno, the entire plane was checked thoroughly, but neither Cooper nor any bomb could be found in the plane. Not only in the plane, but after this incident, no trace of Dan Cooper could be found anywhere, neither alive nor dead. After all, who was Dan Cooper, and where did he go by deceiving the eyes of the whole of America? This case is the case of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which has not been closed so far. No one had seen Dan Cooper jumping from the plane, but because the staircase remained open, it was clear that he had jumped somewhere between Seattle and Reno. The FBI started looking for evidence on the plane, but unfortunately they found only Cooper's tie, 8 cigarette butts, and one of the 2 parachutes which Cooper had left behind, so that no one had a picture of him. After interviewing the passengers and crew, a sketch of Dan Cooper was made according to his appearance. Before Dan Cooper was found between Seattle and Reno, the FBI had to know exactly where he had jumped from the plane. It was not very difficult to find out because the plane was on autopilot, that is, the path on which the plane was flying was already recorded. The speed and altitude of the plane were already known, and with the help of a flight recorder, it was found that the staircase of the plane was open at 8:10. Based on all this information, a search area was defined by estimating Dan Cooper's drop location. This area of 45 square kilometers is surrounded by dense forests and mountains. The aerial team and the land search team searched this entire area thoroughly, but neither did they find any sign of Cooper, nor did they find any briefcase or money. So it was so cold in this whole area that everyone thought that Dan Cooper must have died. But after that, whatever happened, it was not even in the imagination of the FBI. For the first time in American history, the FBI started seeking public help for this case. Dan Cooper's sketch and a $200,000 serial number were also published in newspapers, and any information about Dan Cooper was promised a reward. They thought that if Cooper was alive, he would definitely spend the money somewhere. But surprisingly, not a single note of that serial number was ever re-released anywhere. But the matter was not over yet. About 9 years later, that is, an incident occurred in 1980. There is a beach on the banks of the Columbia River in southern Washington which is called Tina Bar. Here, a child was playing with his parents when he found 3 pieces of notes on the banks of the river. These were $20 bills, which amounted to a total of $5,800. The child's parents took the money and went to the FBI. Fortunately, their serial numbers matched those notes that Dan Cooper had taken with him. This was the first progress in Dan Cooper's hijacking case after 9 years. But instead of solving the case, this incident further complicated the case. because this money was found about 27 kilometers away from the drop location. It was first assumed that the money in the Lewis River must have fallen from Dan Cooper and must have flowed from there to the Columbia River. But later it was noticed that the Columbia River flows in the opposite direction. That is, this money cannot flow from the Lewis River to Tina Bar Beach at any cost. For the FBI, this case was getting more and more complicated. Not only that, but Tina Bar Beach, from where this money was recovered, some excavation work was done here in 1974. After 3 years of hijacking, extra sand was put on the banks of Tina Bar Beach, and the money found was found in this sand. With this new information, it becomes clear that Dan Cooper or one of his associates deliberately came to Tina Bar Beach after 3 years to confuse the case and buried this money. With this case, the FBI investigated people like Cooper, but could not find any specific clue. Many theories also say that Cooper was probably a trained military commando, because the parachute he took with him was a military parachute, and it was more difficult to operate it than the parachute that he left in the plane. In 1980, apart from getting $5,800 cash, the remaining $9,710 was never found again. As evidence, the FBI has, apart from this sketch of Dan Cooper, only this ticket in which he himself wrote his name, and this tie on which the clip was on the left side shows that Dan Cooper was left-handed. This case has puzzled the FBI for the past 50 years. Even today, all the details of this case are available on the FBI website, and the file of this case is still open. I hope you will like and share this video of the info cap. Thank you very much for your loving comments. See you in the next great video.